arrives, accompanied by a 20-year-old guy. And both of them children, they have come to rob Ray's shop. But Ray was unaware with their intention. He thought they might have come for some clock issue, or they may want that their watch should be repaired. But he was not able to know why they both have come at night. So let's see what happens further in the story. So children, let's start the story from the book, The Old Clock Shop. Christmas Eve had arrived. As last-minute shoppers were going home, a thick white sheet of snow lay over Salt Lake City, USA. Yet the lights were still burning in the old clock shop, as Ray, its old deaf owner, worked on a clock he had sold that day. So children, which festival is described over here? Of course, it's Christmas Eve. And it was the late night. And the shoppers, they were going home. And it was a snow all over. And the city described as Salt Lake City in USA. And the lights were still on in the old clock shop as Ray. So who is Ray? Ray is the owner of that clock shop. And children, he was deaf. And he was repairing that watch he had sold that day. Having finished his work, Ray stood up and was on his way to the back room when a cold rush of air from the front door hit the back of his neck. So he has almost completed his work, and he stood up and he went to the back room, and suddenly he experienced a cold rush of wind from the front door, and it hit the back of his neck, which means that as he was about to finish his work and he went inside, suddenly he experienced a very cold wind which touched his body. He turned to meet a last-minute shopper, but his old, wise eyes told him that this was not a shopper. He saw two men, one in his 20s, the other closer to 50. The younger man remained at the door. The older man approached the counter with no sign of friendliness in his eyes. Ray was able to hide his growing fear as he slowly pushed a notepad and a pencil across the counter. So he turned back towards the counter to meet his last-minute shopper. Last-minute shopper means as he was about to close his shop, suddenly he saw that there were two men, one almost in 20s and the other close to 50. And the younger man, he was standing at the door. And the older man, he approached the counter, and there were no friendliness. He was not showing any sign of friendliness. And Ray was able to hide his growing fear. So he gave a notepad and a pencil to that fellow. Children, why did he give a notepad and a pencil? Because as we all know, Ray was a deaf person. He couldn't listen. So he passed a notepad and a pencil so that the customer, the fellow which has arrived, could write down why he has come late at night. He smiled at the unfriendly face, then pointed to his ears and shook his head from side to side. A quick look of surprise changed the man's eyes, changed the man's face as he studied the notepad, then turned and said something to his friend. So he smiled, Ray smiled at the unfriendly face. Though he was having a little fear, but he was able to hide his fear. Then pointed to his ears. He started shaking his head from side to side. But he was surprised. The man's face, as he saw the man's face, he studied the notepad. Then he turned towards his friend and he said something. Ray used the chance to look closely at the men, paying attention to the shape of a gun and a restless hand in the man's right coat pocket. Anger boiled within him, but it was kept down by an inner voice that said, "Be still." He wrote on the notepad, "May I help you?" For the first time, the older man looked directly at Ray and smiled. A cruel, mocking smile. They both understood why he was there, why his friend remained at the door. They looked like men who were down on their luck and were now ready to try something they would later be sorry about. So Ray looked at the man who was paying attention to the shape of a gun and restless hand in the man's right coat pocket. So he noticed what was there in the man's pocket and why his hand was there inside. He was full of anger, but it was kept down by his inner voice. His inner voice said, "Be still." He wrote on the notepad, "May I help you?" And then, first time, the older man directly he looked at Ray and smiled. A cruel, mocking smile. Children, do you know what is the meaning of mocking smile? Mocking smile means thinking that someone or something is stupid or inferior. That is, it is something suspicious smile. They both understood why he was there, why his friend remained at the door. And they looked like men who were down on their luck. So that those men, they were not looking friendly, neither their motto was something good and fruitful. And when now they were ready to try something they would later be sorry about. So by their look, by their appearance, by their facial expressions, Ray could easily make out that their purpose is not good. They are trying to do something which later they would be feeling sorry for it. The clocks ticked on. Ray calmly wrote another message. "Have you come to pick up a clock or watch?" Then he pointed to the lawn, board filled with hanging clocks and pocket watches. He was not a pawnbroker, but at the same time couldn't say no to the needy people who placed their old watches or clocks before him for anything they could get. He loaned more than he should. They would be there when the owners wanted them back, at the same price he had paid with no interest. So again he gave the notepad to that man and he asked, "May I help you? Have you come here to pick up a clock or watch?" And then Ray pointed towards the board. It was written loan and the hanging clocks and the pointed watches. He was not a pawnbroker who has placed all their old watches or clocks before him for anything they could get. He loaned, he gave more than he should, and they would be there when the owners wanted them back at the same price he had paid with no interest. So those men thought that he is a needy man and we should take something from him and we should pay the money. Then the older man seemed to feel a little easier, took out his hand from his pocket and quickly looked at the watch on his wrist. "How much will you give me for this?" the man wrote. Then the older man felt a little easier. He took out his hand from his pocket and he looked at the watch on the wrist and he asked Ray, "How much will you give me for this wristwatch?" Then the man wrote. Ray noticed a little shame in the grey eyes looking at him. The watch was nothing special and yet had great powers. It was something to exchange, a way out of a bad situation. Knowing that great need had brought the man to his shop in the first place, Ray asked, "How much do you need for it?" The reply came back on the notepad, "Whatever it's worth." So Ray noticed a little shame in the grey eyes, in the old eyes of that man. And the watch was not very special, neither it had any powers. It was nothing to exchange, but a bad situation. Might be he thought that it was a bad situation, he is in need of money, that's why he has come. So Ray asked, "How much do you want for this watch?" And the reply came back on the notepad, "Whatever it's worth." So whatever is the cost, you give me that amount. Ray reached into his cash box, pulled out a $50 note and passed it into the man's hand. As they shook hands, Ray looked into the man's eyes. They seemed to say, "Thank you." So Ray quickly went inside into his cash box where he has kept his money and he took out a $50 note and gave it into the man's hand. And they both shook hands. And as Ray shook his hands, he looked into the man's eyes and they seemed to say, "Thank you." They both knew the watch wasn't worth that much. Before turning to leave, the man wrote, "I will be back to pick it up as soon as I can. Merry Christmas." So, as the man shook his head, he looked into the man's eyes as they both shook each other, and then the man said, "Thank you." And they both knew the watch wasn't that much of $50. Before turning to leave, the man again wrote on the notepad. He said, "I will be soon back as soon as I can." And he said, "Merry Christmas." The little story ended on the half hour with the clocks striking all together. The timepieces, which had been looking on silently all the while, rang out the time with such feeling that even Ray thought he could hear them. Their sweet musical message was filled with hope. The timeless message was peace on earth, goodwill towards all, was felt by the three men who stood in the old clock shop. So children, the story finally ended on the half hour when the clocks striking all together, as it was the Christmas day. The timepieces, that is all the wristwatches, the clocks which were hanging out, they all struck 12 with such feeling that even Ray, he could not hear them. Their sweet musical message was filled with hope. They all started enjoying the tinkling of the watches, the tinkling of the bells of Merry Christmas, and the timeless message, that is peace on earth, goodwill towards all, was felt by the three men. That is, it was a Christmas day has arrived, and the Christmas brings the message, that is the peace on earth, goodwill, prosperity towards everyone. And the three of them felt quite happy as they stood in the old clock shop. I hope children you all enjoyed the story and the message which this story gives us That is, we should help the needy and the people who are in great need of something, in demand of something. And the festivals, they give the message that there should be peace on earth, brotherhood, fraternity amongst all. Read the chapter, children, read the story, enjoy it, and mark the new words. That's all for today. Thank you.